afternoon, everyone. Or as they say in Tagalog, magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. Today, we discuss marriage fraud, the dangers and consequences for our immigration updates for the Filipino-American community with a law firm of Reeves, Miller, Zhang, and Diza.
This immigration update is brought to you by Reeves, Miller, Zhang, and Diza, a professional law corporation.
Last week, Attorney General Jeff Sessions announced that the Department of Justice would prioritize criminal prosecutions of immigration violations, including a crackdown on fraudulent marriages. So here to discuss marriage fraud and its consequences is Attorney Eric Welsh from the law firm of Reeves, Miller, Zhang, and Diza. Welcome back, Attorney.
Thank you.
All right, so this is a very rampant situation that happens. We want to inform our kababayans. Can you tell us more about what the Attorney General's new proposal is to prosecute marriage fraud as a crime?
Sure, absolutely. So, as we know, the Trump administration has taken a very hardline approach towards immigration enforcement, immigration policy, and the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, who is in charge of the prosecution of the criminal side, has basically instructed the federal prosecutors across the country to start investigating and bringing to courts possible violations of marriage fraud.
Okay, so for people that really don't understand the context of what marriage fraud is, could you spell it out for us?
Sure. So marriage fraud is a federal crime. It's a felony. It's a felony that can be punished by 5 years in prison or a penalty of $250,000 or both. It's something that is rarely prosecuted, but of course now we have to be concerned that we're going to see more prosecutions in federal court. It's a crime that requires a party to knowingly enter into a marriage for the purpose of evading immigration laws. Basically a marriage that's not for love or companionship, but maybe just to get a green card or just to avoid deportation.
So just for papers. Let's get married just for papers.
That's right. That's a crime. That's a bad idea.
Okay. Are there other consequences besides criminal prosecution?
There are. So even if the Attorney General or the U.S. attorneys don't prosecute the crime in a federal court, the immigration services, that would be the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, can still bar a person from future relief. There's a section of the immigration law, it's called Section 204C, that says that if the Immigration Service finds that a person entered or attempted to enter into a fraudulent marriage, they're barred from benefiting from any future petition. So, for example, if a person had previously entered into a fraudulent marriage, then later they have a child who's a U.S. citizen or employer wants to petition them, that petition can be denied simply on the basis of the prior marriage fraud.
Okay, so this all sounds very serious indeed. Is there any relief for a person charged with marriage fraud?
Well, first, there's the defense of innocence. So we have to keep in mind that there's a burden of proof on the government. In the criminal prosecution, it's the burden to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person is guilty of the crime. In the immigration relief stage, so when it comes to the petition from family members, it's the government's burden to prove that the prior marriage was fraudulent by substantial and probative evidence. Now that's really important because not every marriage is conventional, not every marriage is normal, and there might be unique circumstances that would give the appearance that maybe a marriage would be questionable, but not necessarily fraudulent. So the government has to give somebody, if it's a question of immigration petition, has to give someone the opportunity to explain the circumstances of their relationship. So they have to provide notice of an intent to deny. That gives the alien the right to respond, to rebut allegations, to provide additional proof that it's a legitimate marriage.
Okay.
And there might be other contexts. You know, there are reasons why people would maybe have a strange living arrangement or maybe work schedules that, you know, they might not be perfectly familiar with every detail of each other's lives, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a fraudulent marriage.
Okay. I just know from experience when I had to go in and, you know, they ask you questions. Obviously, our children were running around, so there wasn't much questioning, but do they separate you in different rooms? Like, do they ask you what kind of toothpaste? Like, what is how do they find out about marriage fraud?
Sure. Well, that's a great question. Now, they have a wide latitude of discretion. So the officer who's conducting the interview, they have the right to separate the couple, so they can interview them separately. They also have the right to do additional investigation beyond the interview. And this doesn't have to be any kind of investigation they tell you about.
Oh.
They might look at social media. They might come to your home, they might come to your workplace, they might talk to neighbors. And these are all things that they don't have to give you any advance notice about. If you're applying for an immigration benefit, you've essentially consented to this additional search. So there are a lot of ways that the government can find a fraudulent marriage if they look hard enough.
Okay, what about a person who's put into immigration court based on marriage fraud? Is there any hope for them at all?
Sure. Well, again, there's a question of a defense of innocence, right? So first and foremost, you got to build a really strong defense. If the government's wrong and they've concluded incorrectly that it's a fraudulent marriage and you can prove otherwise. But if it's a fraudulent marriage, if it really is, the only hope is the person who has a green card. So if a person has obtained a green card based on a fraudulent marriage, there's still a potential for relief in court if they have what's called a qualifying relative. That's a spouse, parent, or a child who's a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. So with a green card and a qualifying relative, there's still available relief. There's a waiver that can be requested in court.
Okay. I wish we had the whole show to talk about this because there's so many intricacies and every situation is different. Every person has a different set of circumstances, which is why I highly suggest that if you have any questions at all in terms of marriage fraud, that you reach out to Reeves, Miller, Zhang, and Diza. This is the number for consultation, 1-800-795-8009. Attorney Welsh, thank you so much for being here and giving us the update on what's happening with immigration now. It's so important that we're informed, especially in this day and age.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
All right, thank you. Magbabalik tayo mga kababayan dito sa ating programa with Ariana Bosco and her family. Don't go away, we'll be right back.